Hello and welcome to the AI UPtake, the virtual panel discussion hosted by the University of Pretoria as part of the Deep Learning Indaba𝕏 2021. Thanks everybody for joining. I hope this discussion is going to be quite interesting. The idea is to talk about how engineering and natural sciences can actually benefit from AI, and how do we actually do collaborative research, what new avenues and opportunities are out there. But before we jump into the questions, and before I even go there, I would like to thank everybody for submitting the questions. We will try to get through all of the questions submitted by the audience via the Google form that was shared. But regardless, the whole point of this event is, of course, to have meaningful, interesting conversations. All right, let me quickly introduce the speakers before we jump into the questions themselves. Let's see, it worked just now. Hopefully this is working. Cool, all right. So once again, welcome everyone, and dear panelists, if you can't see my slides, please let me know, since you are the only ones with the right of speaking up. So yeah, welcome to this panel discussion. Like I have said before, it is hosted by the University of Pretoria as part of Deep Learning Indaba𝕏 South Africa. Just a few words about Indaba𝕏 South Africa. If you are not aware of this machine learning conference and summer school, it is an annual thing that actually has been going on for a few years now. It was inspired by the Deep Learning Indaba𝕏, an African event, the main mission of which is to basically strengthen the knowledge and capacity in machine learning on the African continent. Indaba𝕏 is a small version of the main Indaba, and the idea, yes?
Sorry,
I guess my slides
are not on. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, great. Let's try this again. How about now? Thanks for letting me know. Is it any better, or am I still failing?
I don't see them. I don't see the slides.
Let's try. Too many videos. I think I did stop my video.
No, the video is still on.
Try this.
Yeah, there we go.
Right, please let me know what you can see, Bernard. Can you see the slides?
I see on my side it's a black screen.
Okay, that is, I guess, start. No, that thanks a lot. Please bear with me. I do not think the slides are actually going to be shared, because it seems that the software doesn't allow me to share my screen. Yes, the message I get is too many videos. Okay, never mind then, it's cool. We'll just have to go without the slides then. I will simply talk through it. I hope you guys do not mind. If anybody wants the slides, you can share them later. Let's see, let me at least maybe copy then the link to the Indaba𝕏 to the chat room. Maybe that would be a good idea. Okay, Indaba𝕏.co.za is the website that you should visit to know more, or to learn more about Indaba𝕏. So like I have said, the idea is basically to bring together people from various backgrounds, academics, industry professionals, students, enthusiasts that care about AI and machine learning, and specifically applying it in the South African and African context at large. Because compared to the rest of the world, we are currently, as a continent, as a country, somewhat behind in terms of how much research we produce, how many AI applications are actually busy benefiting South African and African society at large. So the main mission of this movement, it's much more than just the conference. It's rather a community of people that come together with this noble intention of actually just making the future for the entire continent and our country specifically better by actually making the most of the talent, the raw talents that we actually do have in the country. This is not the only event. Usually Indaba𝕏 is actually hosted as a live conference. It usually runs over 3 or 5 days, where people get together, attend talks, party in the evenings. It's usually an extremely fun, awesome event. This year, obviously, COVID threw a huge spanner in the works, since 2020, and unfortunately, we're still not exactly out of it yet. But still, we decided that it's important to keep the light burning. So even though we couldn't gather together in a single venue, we have decided to basically present Indaba𝕏 as this roadshow event. It has been running over the past couple of months. Every Friday, some event is hosted. This Friday, it's the UP event. Some other universities have hosted panel discussions, tutorials. Companies also hosted hackathons, competitions, and whatnot. So please do visit the website. I did post the link in the chat to learn more about the past events. All the events have been recorded. So the facts, if you want to join in now, that's fine. You can actually go look at the previous videos, maybe catch up on what has happened. Currently, there are hackathons running with monetary prizes to be won. So if you are an enthusiast looking to apply yourself, we actually have fun competitions. So please do check out the website. And if you are not a part of the Indaba𝕏 family, please do join us. We have a Discord server that we hope to use as an online platform until we can obviously meet each other in person, hug each other, and actually, go back to normal. I do hope that's going to happen sooner rather than later. So that's just, I guess, 2 cents on the Indaba𝕏 itself. All right, so just to quickly introduce the speakers, I am going to enable their videos as I introduce them in no particular order. Let us start with Professor Nico. Let's see. All right, there we go. Prof. Daniel Nico Wilke. I am going to quickly go through some of his points of his biography. He is an associate professor at the Center for Asset Integrity Management, Department of Mechanical and Aeronautical Engineering at the University of Pretoria. Prof. Wilke is the elected president of the South African Association for Theoretical and Applied Mechanics, affiliated with the International Union for Theoretical and Applied Mechanics and the International Association for Computational Mechanics. His research focuses on data-driven and physics-based generative modeling. For his optimization work, he is known for proposing gradient-only optimization, and he has co-authored the book on practical mathematical optimization in the Springer Optimization and its Applied series in 2018. Optimization is his passion, generative modeling his application, and GPU his calculator. All right, next up we have Prof. Wynand Steyn, and again, allow me to quickly switch the video on. All right, thanks for joining us, Prof. Steyn. Prof. Wynand Steyn is the head of department and professor of the Department of Civil Engineering, and he's also the chair of the School of Engineering at the University of Pretoria. He is a professionally registered pavement engineer with a research interest in vehicle-pavement interaction, accelerated pavement testing, pavement engineering, pavement materials, civiltronics, and instrumentation. He is associate editor of the International Journal for Pavement Engineering and the International Journal of Pavement Research and Technology, and has a B3 National Research Foundation rating. He is a fellow of the South African Institution of Civil Engineers, fellow of the South African Academy of Engineering, and an adjunct professor at the Shanjiang University in Jian and the Shandong Jiangsu University in Jinan, China. Next up, we have Dr. Cosi Mariboti. All right, so let me once again switch on the video so that you can map people to the names. Well, I'm sure lots of you would be familiar with Cosi, but again, to introduce him officially, Dr. Cosi Mariboti is the ABSA UP Chair of Data Science at the University of Pretoria and Senior Lecturer at the Department of Computer Science at UP. Cosi works on developing machine learning and artificial intelligence methods to extract insights from data. A large part of his work over the last few years has been in the intersection of machine learning and natural language processing. Cosi's work in this area focuses on techniques to improve tools for and availability of data for local languages or low resource languages. As part of his vision for data science, Cosi is interested in data science for social impact, using local challenges as a springboard for research. In this area, Cosi has worked on projects in science, energy, public safety, and utilities. what's very important to note is because he is actually a co-founder of the original Deep Learning Indaba𝕏, the largest machine learning and artificial intelligence workshop on the African continent, aiming to strengthen African machine learning. All right, now we have professors from the natural sciences. Let us start with Prof. Slippers. All right, please welcome Professor Bernard Slippers, who is the Director of Forestry and Agricultural Biotechnology Institute and Innovation Africa at UP. He is the founding director of the Future Africa Institute and a professor in the Department of Biochemistry, Genetics, and Microbiology at the University of Pretoria. He leads the Tree Protection Cooperative Program and is a core team member, Center of Excellence in Plant Health Biotechnology in FABI. Bernard's research focuses on the ecology and evolution of insects and microorganisms that affect plant health and the development of tools to mitigate their impact. Bernard is passionate about science development. He's a founding member of the Global Young Academy and the South African Young Academy of Science. Bernard is also an elected fellow of the Academy of Science of South Africa. And last but not least, thank you, Bernard. I would like to introduce to you Dr. Kshitij Florat. Hi, Kshitij. Dr. Kshitij Florat is a radio astronomer and works as a senior lecturer at the University of Pretoria in the Department of Physics. He finished his doctoral work at the Indian Institute of Science in 2014, after which he has been based in South Africa. His research interests revolve around extragalactic radio sources, their life cycles, morphology, and their impact on their surroundings. With the advent of the big data paradigm in radio astronomy, Kshitij has focused on techniques to help process and analyze data better, including development of fully automated data reduction pipelines and machine learning techniques to classify radio galaxies. All right, thank you, Kshitij. So, and just a few words about myself. I promise we're going to start now. I don't want to waste too much of your time with just the introductions. My name is Anna Bosman. I am a senior lecturer of computer science at the Department of Computer Science, University of Pretoria. I specialize in artificial intelligence, and I've been working with neural networks specifically since 2007. I'm interested in developing a better fundamental understanding of how and why neural networks work, or don't, because they don't always work. I enjoy working on hybrid approaches that combine different computational intelligence paradigms. I also love seeing machine learning in action. Thus, I'm always keen to try my hand at real-life applications. I very strongly believe that cross-disciplinary collaborative research is the only way to really make meaningful progress in artificial intelligence in this country as well as in the world at large. All right. I believe that is enough introductions. I am going to switch on everybody's video just so that I don't feel like I am alone in this room, and we can finally start the discussion. So if anybody joined us late, you guys have not missed anything just yet. Excellent. So let's see. We have prepared some questions. And I have received questions from the audience. I know that Crowdcast does actually allow me to add questions to this platform, but it's fine. I'll just go through my list. And of course, you guys are welcome to ask questions as we go along. And just to kind of warm up this discussion, the first thing that I would like the panelists to comment on is maybe the very, very basic idea of what AI actually means and stands for. In your understanding, what exactly do we mean when we speak of artificial intelligence? And I'm not going to throw in all the buzzwords such as fourth industrial revolution, machine learning, blah, blah, blah. Let's just take the big umbrella term of AI. In your opinion, your understanding at least, what exactly does it mean? And from your perspective, from your field, what do you think are kind of the pros and cons of AI? Do I have any volunteers, or can I volunteer the panelists to answer this question? Perhaps let's start with Vukosi. Vukosi is the chair of data science. I think he would be quite, well versed in the term. So, Cosi, what's your take on it? When we speak of AI, what do we even mean by it?
Sure. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. When we are thinking about artificial intelligence, from the kind of classical definition out of the Russell Norvig book, on that part is that you have a machine. The machine lives in some world. It can perceive that world, so it has some senses. It then can take actions in that world to then maximize some utility. I come from reinforcement learning, so that's a nice definition on that part. So I typically, when I present, especially to people who are not computer scientists or engineers, I go with that because I think it gives you a good view about what could be artificial intelligence, because you could have a search engine, it lives on the internet, it perceives all the websites that are on the internet. You type in a query, it then tries to return results that maximize the utility. Like, in this case, that whatever it returns is actually useful for the query that you had put together. So that's, I think, for me, the long and short. Everything else outside there is building on top of this definition.
All right. And in terms of the pros and cons using this definition specifically, what are kind of the basic benefits of AI then?
No, I think for most things with this definition, it does not limit to people thinking about machine learning. You can be in robotics. You can be building a little wooden a little wooden contraption that does the same thing. It just has to it has to just be able to perceive something and then try to get towards something. The reason I also use in terms of a pro is that it gets all of us in the room to quickly get into the same context of thinking. One of the challenges we've had in the recent past in South Africa is with the 4IR terminology being thrown everywhere, is people not being able to engage. For me, it's very important for the public to engage in the conversations about these technologies, because we need to have an agreement of what we allow and don't allow in our society. And to do that, you have to have a common understanding of what it is that you're talking about. If we all say, oh, it's too complex, then we risk that the technologies, the technologies get more and more further away from people, and we then don't really understand the consequences of them being there. So yeah, in terms of in that case, I can't say there's a con, because it depends then on what we apply things on, and during this interaction today, we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you so much, Cosi. That's very, very well phrased. All right, I think maybe from the computer science, let's go to the engineering. Prof. Wilke, would you like to give your take on AI, maybe add on to Cosi's comments?
Certainly, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I think when it comes to AI, for me, it's really this idea of having skill learning or skill transfer, and it can be essentially from a human being to a machine. But in essence, you would like to have this ability to transfer or to learn a skill, and then to actually be able to control that skill that's been learned to add value. So that for me is in general, just broadly speaking, the way I like to think about AI. When it comes towards pros and cons, I think there are numerous pros with AI in terms of having services a lot cheaper, a lot more accessible. But one that's also maybe not always appreciated, it is me being a mechanical engineer, I'll maybe highlight that one. It's sort of this idea of mechanical advantage that you could have in terms of that you could actually extend your senses, you could extend your skills as a human being. And so that also brings in a little bit more of the mechanical side of things again, like this whole exploration on Mars, all of those aspects form part of AI. So we're able to do not just things faster or quicker, but really do things that we would not able to do at all with the assistance of AI. So that's, I think, something that's really special regarding that. When it comes to the cons, there's also obviously a number of sort of the classical, whether AI will be controllable if it's let loose in the world. So there's all of that kind of uncertainty regarding that. But in general, in a practical sense, it's typically AI, you train it, it works well in the beginning, and then it sort of starts degrading again after a while, maybe. And that's one of the practical considerations that often happens. It's fairly high cost. It can be fairly exclusive if you think about the cost of training some of these latest models. That's not in everybody's budget to be able to make this accessible. So that's, I think, one of the big dangers in my mind is that there becomes a disjoint in terms of who would be able to actually train AI for their own purposes versus having to rely on sources that are already trained from a platform where it's a bit more inaccessible, if that makes sense. So that's one of the I think the major disadvantages potentially is that you need a lot of money to be able to participate at a high level in AI. Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and perhaps we'll come back to that question. Prof. Steyn, would you perhaps also like to comment?
There we are. Sorry, I just lost connection for a moment over there. Thank you, Anna. I think the part that I would like to add to what was said so far from my field as a civil engineer of infrastructure look and so on, is that what I see artificial intelligence as is the thing that expands my senses in an intelligent way. So it's not just that there's a lot of stuff that's being sensed, but because you've got a bit of an understanding of what I'm looking for, it gives me the ability to sense much more than what I can do on my own. It expands the reach, so I can sit here and I can sense intelligent information from far off sites, places, and so on. And the system, if I can call it that, can take rudimentary decisions based on this. And I think there were some questions later on that we will get to in terms of some of the benefits and so on, but that starts to provide me with a lot of benefits in terms of risk identifications and mitigation from a civil engineering viewpoint, again, of seeing stuff developing long before it becomes a problem based on a large collection of input information and the analysis of this information. The one thing that there's a lot of pros, obviously, and there's maybe various cons like Nico has mentioned and so on. The one that I always feel that's quite important is the fact that in my mind, artificial intelligence is not wisdom. And it's that balance that's always required where your system can be trained, but you need to train it and you need to make sure that it understands what we are looking for and how are we looking for it. But I think you still need that humanity wisdom part to sometimes identify things that you have not trained it with. And I'm sure at least at this point, the systems are not such that I can say, thank you very much, it replaced my thinking. It replaces a lot of my repetitive work and a lot of my trying to keep my eyes all over the place. But I think that balance is always important of the wisdom part as opposed to the intelligence part.
Thank you so much, Prof. I definitely agree that it does kind of give you this extra human way of just collecting data itself. But yeah, simply training the model doesn't mean that we've solved the problem, and determining how much you can in fact trust the model is a science of its own. Thank you so much for that comment. Let us hear the opinions of the natural science crowd. Prof. Slippers, I'm going to put you up on the big screen. What's your take on this?
There we go. Yeah, it would be dangerous if I give you definitions of artificial intelligence. It might take your listeners completely off track. But I do experience it as well. First of all, my experience is of artificial intelligence is it's something you need to do with people who understand that definition from the computer sciences. So something that naturally leads us into an interdisciplinary space, and that's been one of my positive experiences with it. But something, and that's has already been said, that extends our senses and starts to approximate something that we would typically associate with human intelligence, including this idea of being able to learn. So being able to train something that would learn how to take decisions, based on which one can ultimately do predictions and act on. I think and therein for me, of course, lies the obvious. If you ask about pros and cons, that there's obviously enormous power in this, that it extends our ability as humans to do sensing, to sense a complex environment or complex data sets, get sensible information from that in a manner that wouldn't be possible through physical human effort. But that is dependent on the input that you provide, the data sets that you provided with the training that you do to develop those algorithms. And therein, I think, lies a danger that there could be substantial bias in that. And I think I see some evidence of that around me. So, a desire, well, I mean, maybe one step back, if as a biologist, engaging with computer scientists and engaging with literature, hearing about and seeing the potential of this new way of approaching data analysis makes me incredibly excited, because we are sitting on such an explosion of data in the biological sciences that we simply don't have the human capacity to manually analyze and explore anymore. And we know that there is an enormous amount of power there to exploit for medicine, for food production, etc. So being very excited about that, but then at the same time being concerned when I see the difficulties that we have in developing something that is locally relevant, or is based on local data sets that's applicable to our various environments.
Thank you so much for that. I definitely agree that one thing that definitely applies to us, I guess, as a country, is that we can't just take something out of the box that maybe worked for an American context and simply, plop it into South African soil, expect it to work. But perhaps we can revisit this topic at a later stage today, like what actually does make South African applications special. All right, and Kshitish, I would like you to also have a chance to let us know what's, like, from the radio astronomy perspective, you're working with this exciting field with huge data. Speaking of big data, I don't think data gets much bigger than the data that you work with. So from your perspective, where do we stand? What's AI? What do we expect from it? What can it give us?
Thank you very much, Anna, for allowing me a chance to speak. As you said, radio astronomers have recently turned to machine learning and AI techniques just because of the humongous volume of data we are generating. And at this point, it's frankly beyond the capacity of humans to work it on their own. And therefore, to me, I'm going to give a very utilitarian and somewhat brutal definition of AI and ML. And I hope everyone will forgive me for that. To me, it's a collection of techniques and technologies which allows scientists to enhance their efforts, and most importantly, perhaps, mitigate their efforts. So in radio astronomy, right now, AI is used for decision making as in other fields. And what we do hope eventually is that it would allow a completely new perspective, which is not perhaps possible through human eyes. And that's the end goal, as I understand it. For the time being, the pros are enormous. If techniques are successful, then a lot of manual effort is taken off the hands of scientists, and they are free to do something more constructive, let us say. At the same time, the danger is, as has been pointed out, we do carry a lot of biases of our own when we are training the machine to do those exact same tasks for us. And I do believe that we have to be very, very careful when doing that. But apart from that, AI and ML are going to turn out to be very instrumental tools in radio astronomy of today and in the future. near future.
Thank you so much for that, Kshitij. Thanks, everybody. So now that the definition is out of the way, I guess let's try to get into the meat of it. What I wanted you to talk about is perhaps if you could discuss or describe the coolest, perhaps most impactful projects that has included AI that you have already carried out in your field, or maybe that perhaps if you haven't really had a chance to apply AI just yet, what projects that you are currently working on or worked in the past or plan to work in the future, what project do you think would actually benefit the most from it? So to a long story short, in your current work, where do you think AI fits best? And in this case, I would like you to actually be as specific as you want to be. Now that the abstract definitions are out of the way, if we get down to it, what exactly are you trying to do with AI right now? I don't know, maybe Kshitij wants to start us off on that. His field is really exciting.
Thank you once more. Yeah, I would love to comment on that. So one of the things which I do, and this is my personal experience, and this issue is something I have been obsessed with ever since my PhD days, in fact. That's of classifying sources which shine in the radio band. And most of these sources are far away from us. They are extragalactic radio sources, in fact. And they come in a bewildering variety of shapes and sizes. And back when I was doing my PhD, when I was in fact defending my thesis, I had to manually go through around 1,300 sources and classify them by hand. And at the talk I made a statement saying that at one day this will be possible through completely automatic means. And a senior scientist, a very senior scientist, expressed his, he was not very hopeful that this will ever happen. A few years later, when I was working at the Sarajevo office in Cape Town, me and my colleague, Arun Anyan, I think he is also among the audience right now, we embarked on the very first application of convolutional neural networks to exactly solve this problem. This was the first time ever that someone had applied convolutional neural networks to classify a whole bunch of complicated structures in radio astronomy. And to me, still that is the coolest application I have done, because perhaps I'm biased because that was the first time I have used ML techniques. Things have come ahead since then, and I have participated in a whole bunch of situations where we have applied AI and ML tools to a variety of other issues. But to me, that remains the coolest use I have done.
So I guess like the first time seeing that this thing, this computer science thing actually applied to your work does in fact produce tangible results, it must have been exciting. You apply it and yes, what you get is useful. That sounds really cool. Let us then go in the opposite order now. I would like Prof. Slippers then to comments from the biology side then. Bernard, I don't know if you want to speak about the particular project that used AI and maybe where you plan to use it. Let us know where we can help your work.
Absolutely. I'll highlight two areas. So I work on plant diseases, plant health, and diagnosing plant diseases accurately is a important and complicated task, just like human diseases. If you get a sore throat at the moment, you want to be very sure whether you have COVID or something else, and the same, of course, with plant diseases. And just like in that example, it's an expensive and complicated task. Doing that across an agricultural landscape, and especially if you think about South African and African landscape, many of the farmers, for example, would not have access to such specialized diagnosis. And even if we could provide it, it would be an enormously expensive exercise. So a project, in fact, that Anna has also been involved in, but it's not the only such project in this field, is to use image analysis for diagnosis. And I think there is evidence that this can be done relatively accurately. And even if we could only get to relatively accurately, so that we can select from amongst thousands of samples those that we particularly need to focus on, the potential impact, in an African landscape where it's estimated that we at times lose between 50 to 60% of what we produce, which on the production side, I think there's also lots of gains we can make. But if you lose more than half of what you actually produce due to diseases, for example, that is a massive loss. So the ability to be able to diagnose, or at least focus our attention on diagnosis through image analysis, I think is a very powerful, so those are projects that I've been involved with and colleagues of mine, and I see enormous potential for that. So a type of pre-diagnosis that's done. The other one that I would highlight is on the bioinformatics side. So there are enormous amounts of molecular data that is being produced. So genomic sequence data, many people would have heard now with COVID-19, the genomes of that virus that, was important in vaccine development and understanding how it's evolving over time. We're producing those for all organisms at a massive scale, but we're sitting with, volumes, or many of these genomes where 90-95% of what's in them, you have no idea of what their function is. And to be able to predict function and structure from that molecular data has been something that's been out of reach for most other than the most highly resourced research environments, where you could do crystal structure and high impact microscopy work that was very expensive and technically very difficult to do. Artificial intelligence is becoming extremely accurate now in predicting structures of the proteins that are built from that DNA in a manner that 20, 30 years ago might have won you a Nobel Prize. And that is a leap in our understanding in biology that was incomprehensible five to 10 years ago.
Thank you so much for that. It's interesting that you mentioned an image processing task, as well as, I think with the genomics, it is probably less of an image, more of almost like a language processing type of problem. And on that note, I would actually like to invite Dr. Mariboti to speak up, because I think your video is off, but let me switch it back on for you. I think your work focused specifically on natural language processing. So tell us about your Passion AI project.
Thanks for this. I think for me, there's two parts in terms of when you're thinking about the coolest thing about like AI. One has been the opportunity that I've gotten in this space. I started working in this area 2006, 2007 as a student engineering. And one of the biggest things has been, on one part, to expand the community. So one thing we have to really acknowledge, and I'm just going to say it now, is that we want more people to be in these spaces. One part is kind of dealing with gender diversity in this area, and we've worked with Deep Learning Indaba𝕏 to make more accessible people to come in, at CSR with the data science for decision enablement vacation program or internship program, and also with the Masakani community on the spaces. It's something that for me is very cool, because we get to then work with people, build them, bring them into the area, and then also expand the practice, right? Even at the university, we have the Masters in Big Data Science, which has also made me very connected to almost everybody on this call, because we then can work on AI in different spaces, in different areas of applications or even theory. Outside that, we do a lot of work in natural language processing, and it's been very interesting seeing how, if we go back like 3 years ago, thinking about low resource languages on the African continent, and where we are now, where we're really trying so many different spaces to come up with lots of different solutions. So one of the things that our group worked in collaboration with the Masakani project was working on translation for African languages. So I'll put the link in the chat for people who are on here. And now we worked over the last year with a couple of interns, both at the university and at the African Masters in Machine Intelligence in Accra, on now making those models actually available. As a data scientist, I enjoy the theory on the one side of the AI, but on the other side, the technology has to be in somebody else's hands. If people are not using it, it's very hard. And to do this is also not easy. So with the translation system, you can go in, it's for African languages, and we're building it up. Actually, the meeting before this talk, which is trying to make sure we archive all of the models correctly on Zenodo. So those will be available on there. So that's providing access, that's working also to figure out where the limits are. We don't have as much data as in languages like English or French or German. So you then have to come up with new techniques and new approaches to deal with that. The second one is also from the data science perspective, trying to understand our world in text, right? So how do we then get to know what humans are doing in the world by analyzing the text? So another project we launched about a week and a half ago, I'm just going to do more, that's also very interesting, is now analyzing the South African municipal elections and trying to basically get to understanding misinformation during that period. This is a project between us at UP, Media Monitoring Africa, and the CSIR. And with that, it's in this way, the publishing is slightly different. We're doing it through blog posts. So you'll see every few days there's a new blog post that's coming along, and it's working on the analysis using machine learning to actually identify and almost use it as forensic tool to get down to who might be kind of problematic in these spaces. And these are places where we kind of now have some maturity of the technologies, but then you then build up these approaches with other people outside that then allow us to really ask very tough questions. It's not easy to get to these persons, and it takes time. For me, to get to the link I just shared is probably 5 years of a journey to get to these types of technologies that we can actually build them up and actually test them, right? That's the other thing about AI. There is garbage in, garbage out in terms of the machine learning. And also you need to be able to provide enough prior kind of evidence that the approach is actually valid for the problem that you have. So I think those were the two things. One part is I really like the community. I like having the Indaba𝕏. When Anna said, hey, come along, I was like, definitely, I'm going to go on there. And building it up and making it more inclusive is something we should all be really working towards, and not just at UP, but everybody, I think, on this call. And then the other side, there are spaces where just a little use of the technology or developing new methods in these spaces really allow for people like journalists to really understand what's the information, where it's millions and millions of documents, and actually get to actually knowing what's inside there instead of reading every one, which will be kind of intractable.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for that. Let us then ask the engineers on the call. I feel like, because you kind of sit at the best of both worlds, since you obviously are managing a data science degree at the University of Pretoria. You probably have collaborated with every single person on this call, and much more than that. But I feel like some of us work in a more narrow niche. So Prof. Steyn, maybe you would like to let us know in your field how did AI help you, or maybe how do you hope to let it help you in future? What can you facilitate engineering as computer scientists, as AI specialists?
Perfect. Thank you very much, Anna. I appreciate that. One of the things that we do specifically as road and rail engineers is we do what we used to call visual analysis of the infrastructure. And visual analysis is just a very smart word to say, on a road, we walk on the road and we look at the condition of the road. The way that I explain to my students is it's how to read a road, how to look at what you see, look for indications, cracks, color changes, various things, and with your understanding and experience of the various influences and the way that the materials react and so on, build up a picture of what's the condition of this road and what do you expect for this road to do in the near future. So it's something that we've done for many, many years. And obviously, walking on the road and doing this type of thing, you get various different viewpoints, because I see a crack differently than my colleagues see it. And it's a very labor-intensive issue. And there's been work for many, many years trying to do it with cameras and video cameras and things like that. And in a recent number of projects, I think the use of artificial intelligence to start to be able to say we've got a huge number of examples of what a crack on different types of roads look like and what does it mean. That has started to develop quite a lot. And linked to this is a project with one of our PhD students, Andre Broekman, is working on currently, doing a similar thing on the railroads, where the objective is to have a visual indication. So you've got cameras in front of your train, and as you use it, from this visual images from the rail, you build up a condition index continuously. So every time you drive over that section of railroad, you get an input based on the visual parts of what you pick up. And this may sound very simple on the one hand, because it's sort of, I look at it and it looks like this or this or this. The problem is that what you see in a stereo way with your eyes that's sensitive to color differences, and whether you are looking north or south or east or west, because suddenly it's amazing on a road. We teach a student, sometimes you look in one direction, you see nothing wrong with the road. You turn around and you look with the sun at your back, and suddenly you see a huge lot of things. So just saying we've got cameras and we take these pictures and this is easy to do it's much more complicated than that. And you want to extract more than just the visual part. For instance, on the rail now, we are quite far down the line in extracting the actual profile of the rail. Now, you can do a lot of this with much more expensive instruments and lasers and things like that. But now you need a lot of lasers on your train to enable you to do this continuously. Or if you are doing this on a road, you need laser sensors and stuff on your vehicles, whereby a dash cam is something much more simple. But you have to build up this huge database of what can a specific crack look like, and which groups of cracks or undulations, or even sometimes just color changes, what do they mean? And how do you interpret this? And that links to what I said earlier about this whole risk mitigation and management continuously. Because it's possible to go out once a year or 2 years or 3 years and doing a major in-depth, expensive evaluation of what's the condition of my infrastructure. But that gives you one little blob every 2-3 years. So whatever happens in between, you don't know. And if we can get this technology operational so that each and every train, each and every vehicle on my road can build up this understanding, that will mean that if there was no crack yesterday on the road and a number of vehicles drive today, I can start to get an indication on my system that says something has changed. You have to go and have a look, because that supports our risk mitigation. Solve the problem because it becomes a major problem. It's something that in the mechanical engineering fields and so on, I think they've done a lot more work, because you can listen to your engines and your motors and stuff. And if you've got a trained ear, again, it's amazing the difference between let's call it a digital sound and the human ear hearing something. Sometimes all of us can hear, listen, that sounds different than that. And then we pick up all the microphones that we can have, and we don't pick up a difference. And it's that part that's so challenging and amazing to me, that we have to get closer to the human side of our senses and make sure that this artificial intelligence models and systems of us can pick up what we are picking up. So I think that's probably for me one of the real exciting things in the near medium future, if we can get through that.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it really kind of encompasses this idea of artificial intelligence, where essentially you take very, very fine grained expert knowledge and you're trying to capture it, obviously, and somehow transfer into the model. But then I can imagine the price that you have to pay is extremely detailed labeling then on all of these data sets, like the tiniest differences in sounds. Obviously, you need an actual civil engineer to sort of provide this information, expert knowledge to the neural network, or whatever the model might be first. And then hopefully the technology will be able to pick it up. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Prof. Steyn. Prof. Wilke, would you like to let us know from a mechanical engineering perspective then, how did AI aid your field? Specifically you as a researcher, as as a citizen?
Certainly. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think as an engineer, I came from a background of modeling. So generative modeling in terms of finite element models or discrete element models. And in essence, what it implies is that we go through some training, learn some physics, and then we learn how to solve those physics, and then we can predict some responses given some inputs. That is, in essence, our formal background in typically mechanical engineering. And the really exciting thing for me about AI and machine learning and applying it in this field, if modeling is your passion, which is it's my passion in terms of what I do in my research, is to go from the other direction, to say, if I observe a couple of things around us, and in essence, and I observe what's going on, and this is really the foundation of science, is what made Newton and Kepler describe the planetary motion, was they had to observe it. And just from those observations, they had to work quite hard to get down to the physics. And so it's to do that process in reverse using a machine or using a computer, in terms of going from data and really learning the physics in the end, as opposed to just a model that can generate responses that looks like the physics, but actually to really get down to the physics. And that really is what I've considered to be the ultimate, well, let's call it interpretable model. Because it's one thing to have a model that you have, and you can generate samples with that model. But if you can't control that model nicely, it's quite tricky to use it sensibly. So the example I always like to use is if I drive my car and I turn the steering wheel, and all of a sudden the brakes go on, the radio goes off, and the windows go down. That is not an easy car to drive. And it's not so easy to understand what the car is doing when you turn the steering wheel. But if I have a car where if I turn the steering wheel, it only turns and everything else is off, that is really what an untangled model is. It's a model where one parameter does one thing only, and it has one outcome in the response of that model. So for me, the really goosebump moment of AI and machine learning is to say, here's a lot of data that you give to the machine, and what you get back is a set of differential equations or a set of partial differential equations. So in essence, what you're doing in that process is you are replacing what Newton did, what Kepler did. So all of what science has built on it, what's really been successful behind science. The computer is for the first time now entering that stage of actually being able to generate those models. And what's exciting about that is if you have data for something which there doesn't exist a model at this stage, at least you can use machine learning or AI to get a first stab of a physics-based model that you can then refine later on. Because there's always this problem in machine learning, and that is in essence is there are many models I can generate, or many physical descriptions I can have in different coordinate systems that does the same thing. So I can have the same physics that I describe in a Cartesian coordinate system or a spherical coordinate system or a cylindrical coordinate system. And in the end, the physics is the same, but the coordinate systems are different and the way I interpret them are quite different. And the challenge there is to find that coordinate system that is really insightful to you as a user or to you as an engineer. And the reason why generative modeling is so exciting for me is I always say that if you have a generative model, you can almost do anything with it. You can use it to understand when something is going breaking or when something is going well. So it really allows you to capture the full essence of what that thing you're trying to describe. And that is, in essence, how we apply typically in mechanical engineering. In the center that I work with is to try and predict, in essence, when something is going wrong, or to predict how long something will still last. So it's essentially almost to what Prof. Slippers is doing, health of trees, we are doing the health of machines. And so in essence, the whole key is to try and do that in a fairly unsupervised way, but also in a way that you can interpret it critically. Not to say something is going wrong, but to say something is going wrong and this is the reason why. Because I think that is the key thing for engineering. There are many applications where you can apply machine learning and AI and saying, I'm getting the answer out. I don't really care if I understand where it's coming from. I just want the answer. But I think for engineering to make it really a powerful and impactful technology, that reasoning is important. This is the answer and this is why. And that is the challenging part. And that's why the the sort of the physics part and the interpretability is so key in the research that I do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Wilke. It's actually interesting because I feel like some of the applications we've discussed so far focus specifically on what you said. I have data, I know there are some answers in this data, give me the prediction, but in your case, you don't want to replace the expert. You actually want to replace the scientist himself. You want the machines not just give you the answer, but actually kind of do the research for you, right? Derive the, not just, derive the meaning itself from data. It's really, really exciting. Thank you so much for that. All right, but let's carry on with our discussion. I did want to ask you about how important it is to embrace AI in your field, but I feel like we have actually already answered that to a large extent. Clearly, it can aid your fields, various fields in very meaningful ways. So perhaps let's get to the topic that I personally really wanted to touch on specifically in this discussion. Collaborative research, right? Obviously, that is in the title of the panel, so we need to get opinions there. Why do you think is AI transdisciplinary by definition? And also, what is your experience with collaborative research? How hard is it to carry it out? What would you say are, the main roadblocks? What can we do to make collaborative research more, more tangible, more approachable somehow? How do we even find each other? How do we find this other experts that's missing in the link? So on collaborative research, what is your opinion? Is it hard in your experience? And if so, why is it hard? And how can we perhaps make it slightly more tangible? I would take a volunteer who would like to speak up. I think Vukosi has unmuted himself. So Vukosi, I guess the floor is yours. No, you haven't. All right, maybe it's just mine. But since I kind of volunteered you, let's start with you then. You do work. I think it makes sense also to start with you, since I feel like with the data science degree, cross-disciplinary is probably what you do all the time.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I think for people to understand in these spaces is that there's sometimes tension in multiple ways. So here I'm going to talk as there's one part is going to be researchers and the other part as practitioners. So as researchers, whenever methods come into new spaces, there's a tension that gets created because people start asking, where's the venue to communicate my outputs, right? So that's a massive thing that people take as being, oh, it means I should stay away from a space until it becomes mature, because then I can publish my work. Because if for example, let's talk about there's a project we're working with the law faculty in a legal journal or conference might get rejected, in a machine learning journal or conference might get rejected. It doesn't mean that the work is not useful, and that's a thing to be at some time where people who are working in these spaces have to find kind of interesting ways to make the project actually viable for everybody. Is that then you end up having to negotiate at different times. So there will be times where there's a bigger push to get the machine learning up to snuff, and then you publish there. And then there'll be a bigger push to get the legal setting to actually get up to snuff. But then later on, those things become their own fields, right? You can say, hey, advanced analytics for law or something. It happens always in that way. And I'm more speaking to the more younger researchers, even though I'm still a young researcher, to not give up in these spaces. And just because there's no clear at the beginning, just then hack it. Figure out how to have a paper or an output that makes sense for AI's venue, and then have another one for it. And then what you see is that it allows you then at the beginning to make the whole project more viable. In terms of practicalities, it's, again, for me, getting to a common language, right? And not, in this case, not an NLP, but that people understand what it is that you can do with AI or machine learning and what you can't do. And I'll use that kind of interchangeably, with machine learning, you've got data, you pass it through an algorithm to learn patterns about your data on this part. So for us within, for example, the Masters in Data Science program, we found it very interesting to work with people across the university and also across the country and continent, because they've got very interesting, and as our Vice Chancellor says, wicked problems that need to be kind of attempted at. And through this, you find it is natural. It has to cross. The methods have to cross disciplines. There's no way that there's going to be one person on one side of a river hoping that magically they'll solve their problem without thinking, how do we become more data-driven? How do we use methods that are in machine learning for our spaces? At the same time, for the machine learning and AI researchers, is how do I better understand the world, right? We do all these things because we want to do the science. We want to understand our world. And how then do I come up with methods that better work with the world, the way the world is? We're not going to change it at all times for it to work. So that becomes the practical part of it. And you find this, that some things take long because you have to make sure that the foundations are correct. After the foundations are correct, then you start, it's easy to then build on the machine learning. A big one, I always say, start with the dumbest thing first, every time. Right, we have, it's great running my GPUs and running all this stuff on and creating heat in our building and all that stuff. But you find that for a lot of initial work, the biggest impact just comes from running logistic regression. Right, because you have access to the data, you work with the people who've got, in terms of now working across disciplines, you find out, you explain to them what it is machine learning does and things like that. They now start working to collect the data in the correct way, they clean it in the right way, and then you put it through logistic regression, and then you find out very quickly whether, hey, this is going to be a really hard problem, and that's when you need the more advanced methodologies. Oh, hey, actually, we set up the problem in such a good way that we have our first answers. And then let's actually dig, as Nico said, into understanding why. Why is it that now we are doing it? Because that's going to be the important thing. People, we have a lot of models that are very opaque and we don't see unders. But then when you're doing the cross-disciplinary work, people have to understand why is this decision being made? And then they have to also interpret it for their field. How should they read what these results actually are? We might be very interested in F1 scores and accuracy, but that doesn't play if you're working in health. That doesn't make any sense. You have to kind of now figure out why is it actually working, and then be able to then communicate that to the other side. And that's the thing. So as I said, two things. One, for researchers, it doesn't mean it's bad spaces. You will be told this, that don't work in these spaces on that part. But you can find ways. Hack it. We are there. We exist. People who do this. And then on the other side, practically, there's all these steps that you have to look into and get to know the other person on the other side. Don't just come in and say, I'm just going to apply AI and I don't need to really. You have to spend time immersed in that space to really understand it.
Thank you so much for that. I definitely agree with the points that if you cannot overfit your data, then most likely you can't fit it either. And also being, model first rather than data first is probably a horrible approach where you come in with a swanky deep learning model and you have your mindset, I'm going to train the CNN, and then it turns out you never needed it. So yes, apply Occam's razor. That's words of wisdom right there. Thank you so much, Cosi. All right, who would like to comment on collaborative research next? Please go ahead, Nico.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. I think there's a couple of aspects in terms of what makes a collaborative research project work or not work. I think the most important one is trying to find people in the collaborative team that are equally motivated and equally interested in the problem. Because often what happens is you end up with a team that's maybe unbalanced on the motivation side or unbalanced in how much they want to invest in that solving that problem. And I think that is for me, in my experience, the most important aspect, because skill and all of those things that gets transferred as one collaborates in the project, and the understanding and seeing things from a wider perspective and from a different perspective. But it's really just making sure that as you start with the project, you don't really have any value add in the beginning. And then you start solving some proxy problems that are maybe a bit simpler than what you actually would like to solve, but to try and make sure everybody keeps track and keeps motivated during that whole process. And in the end, to be able to answer that why that Cosi mentioned, because I think that's the key thing for collaborative research is that it's not just a number that you give out in the end, but that there's good understanding of why that that is that number, because I think that is in the end how you translate it from what Prof. Steyn earlier alluded to towards wisdom, is instead of just having sort of knowledge about something, that allows you to engage a little bit more on the wisdom side of things, I think. So that is absolutely one aspect that I think is absolutely key, is that motivational factor. So it's a very, the one aspect is very social and very, the dynamics of the social group that plays quite a key role. When it comes to, I think, a collaborative research in terms of the other aspects, in terms of the whether it's now multidisciplinary or just a single discipline, if you're a methods kind of researcher, I think you can often get away with making up toy problems in your field and sort of work in isolation. But I do think in the end, the really impactful research is really transdisciplinary. It's where you pull in a lot of aspects, a lot of fields together, because those are the problems that typically matter. It's the world is not silos, and we don't live only in silos. We do as a mechanical engineer, when we build a plant or build a vehicle, has an influence on the environment, on social dynamics, etc., etc. So all of these things are so coupled, and I think we're starting to appreciate that complexity of the world of coupling. So in that regard, I think the transdisciplinary are really where the impactful research lies. Although you can always have a toy problem as academic and stay in your sort of side of the court, I do think it's the going onto the field and playing with everybody in the end is really where the value is. A lot of values to be added. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Well, I definitely agree that, like, if some parties are obviously not involved, it's like, you know, especially from my own experience as well, coming from computer science background, sometimes I find what is really lacking on my side. For example, I might be good with neural networks, but extremely bad at understanding genetics, you know, or astronomy or something like that. So I feel like as a computer scientist, I actually need a lot of sort of a handheld approach to some extent. Like, I need the astronomer to show me what the correct sources are. Like, where do I even go to start and comprehend the problem that you are trying to solve? I guess in my experience, that's sort of the main mismatch is also a big factor. So maybe I'll also throw this into the discussion. I don't know if other panelists would like to comment. Again, in your experience, why is collaborative research hard? And perhaps in terms of like the entry level, how much domain expertise would you say is required to even start, talking to you? If I want to do a civil engineering research, what kind of knowledge should I have? If I want to start doing some applying my machine learning models to astronomical problems, again, what kind of basic background is required? Would anybody like to comment on that? Kshitish, please. And maybe then Bernard has also raised his hand. So let's do Kshitish and then Bernard. Let us know what we need to know to even consider entering your field.
Right. At the risk of being slightly controversial, I don't know if collaborative research is really hard. As is true for any interdisciplinary field research, at the start there are some roadblocks, and they need to be overcome. For example, people on both sides do need what you could call a cultural introduction, at least, to each other's field. What is possible and what is not possible, and what are the problems? That understanding needs to be there. So far, the approach in radio astronomy has been to have radio astronomers on one side and AI and ML experts on the other. And part of the reason why that happens is that it's really a new set of techniques which has come into radio astronomy. It's very new, and therefore people who have expertise in both ML and astronomy, they are very, very rare. So that situation is, of course, changing as time goes. I'm talking more about how it was a few years ago, but now, of course, there are more and more people getting into this intersection of specifically astronomy and ML. But while that is true, there are always stumbling blocks, initial ones. I think it's relatively easy to make the other side understand what are the key issues, and in return try to understand what are the problem-solving approaches which could be actually useful, rather than going into a whole forest of methods and applying each one in turn. All that requires communication before actually doing any problem solving. And I think that is the key there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So communication definitely is key. And I think there was another question that Prof. Wilkie at some point suggested, can we use AI itself to help us communicate, like train this translator that translates from the astronomical lingo to computer science lingo? But maybe that's a bit of an off topic. Prof. Slippers wanted to comment as well on the entry level into his field and collaborative research. So please, floor is yours, Prof. Slippers.
Yeah, I wanted to link onto something that I think a couple of you say, but specifically Cosi saying, spend time to get to know the people. Because I think, it's in some ways it's hard from the perspective of it's actually about human relations, and in fact, important word I would say is trust. Trust, if we're gonna be working with data, I think that's the thing that we need to take care of up front, and that trust goes, of course, to data that might not be mine, that I might have from some source, but also the trust between, if it's biologists and computer scientists and whoever else are, the trust that one builds in a team. That allows one to do really sort of explore over time the space where we start to get to know each other's worlds and can really get to a truly novel intersection that can have impact that otherwise wouldn't have occurred. And the other word I would to highlight there is time, and I don't think that happens quickly. So I think you unfortunately need time for that intersection to mature. For truly significant impact, and that requires building of human relations. So I think that call of get to know the people that you work with is a critical part. In terms of entry level and so forth, I think, or the way I'd like to think about it is, we do have people that would, be across the, have some understanding across the disciplines. But you absolutely need on both sides those that are deeply embedded in their disciplines, and where there is simply not enough mind space to absorb that much else from another space. So really bringing together those that have deep insight into their own space, building those trust relationships over time, and finding a common space that's more impactful than what they could have done on their own. So trust and time is the two things I'd like to highlight there.
Thank you. I do appreciate the comments about the human relationships themselves, because obviously, I do think that sometimes we think of ourselves as, models to some extent. We take things in, we come up with a model, we publish a paper, right? So the job is done. But of course, there is a lot more going behind the scenes, and still, like, as humans, we are very much soft intelligence. So like soft skills are important. Just talking to each other is definitely very, very important. There is something I also wanted to bring up, and this was also, I think, one of the questions from the audience. The thing that sometimes actually damages collaborative research is something known as office politics, right? So like sometimes people in the same department or the same faculty choose to compete rather than collaborate, which again, in my experience, can be extremely damaging, to new projects. Also, I do feel like Prof. Steyn didn't get a chance to speak on this topic. So, Prof., what's your take? I don't know if you want to speak specifically on how to control office politics. How to overcome the natural human tendency, I guess, to compete rather than collaborate. And of course, if you'd like to let us know what do we need to know again to start research in civil engineering, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna.
Your opinion there.
I think you need all the artificial and human intelligence and wisdom put together, and then you will still battle to sort that one out. So thanks for the challenging question. But I think from my experience, and because he has mentioned trust, Bernard has mentioned time and relationships. And And I think in all of the collaborative type of projects, and not only for artificial intelligence type projects, but obviously that for sure also, it is very important, if you want to make this work, that everybody that's part of that project can see the reason they are there and their benefit, and not benefit in a selfish type of way. But if I am going to invest a certain amount of my time in a project, I at least need to have a good understanding, why do I do this? And sometimes I'm quite happy to invest to support somebody else's career. It may be a younger colleague and you are playing a mentorship role, and you are really not going to get something specific out of this, but you understand it from the beginning, and the roles and the trust and the relationship is there to understand what are we trying to do. And I think that's where most of the times when I saw that a collaborative transdisciplinary type of project did not work out, it was because the expectations of different parties were not the same, and the expectations were not communicated to each other clearly at the beginning, so that everybody understands, listen, I may be able to get 5 papers out of this, and you may be able to just get more data for your long-term model out of this. Let's get acceptance into that from the start. And I think very often we miss out as engineers from our side for sure, but I think as researchers and academics often, about just that building the relationship before we start to do the work. Because we all get to the party and it's sort of, wow, we are going to develop this model and solve these problems and do all of these things. And then if I can basically say it like this, if I ask you, but this colleague that you spend 60 hours a week on developing this model and doing this work and so on, is this colleague married? Does he or she have got children? What drives them? What's their plans for this year? And he's sort of, no, but that's personal stuff. I want to work on the project. But you cannot work on the project together if you do not appreciate what this colleague brings to the party this morning. What's the stuff that bothers them? What's the biggest stuff that they are concerned about? And I know this has got almost nothing to do with the topic, actually. But I think if we, again, let me bring it back. If we miss the humanity, and you have to understand, and Nico will appreciate this, for an engineer to focus on this part, it's very difficult for us to accept and acknowledge that it's important. But if we miss the humanity of the project and of the team and of the bigger picture, then we totally miss it, because then we can have a very beautiful model, and yes, I hit the computer and it gives me answers, and thank you very much. And in a week's time, I don't even remember the colleagues that worked with me on this project. And I think very specifically, if you want a good example of this, Bernard and I met each other, let's say more formally, about 5 years ago, when I was standing next to Future Africa being built, doing some drone footage. And he said, well, who are you and what are you doing? And we started to chat. And because we became neighbors with Future Africa and Engineering 4.0, we just talked and we just talked. And I don't think we started to do anything significant in terms of collaboration for the first 2-3 years. But by that time, it's developed to this point that we've got a bit of an understanding of what drives the other person. And therefore, you've got a bit of an appreciation of, if I put this on the table, then I will get support for it, because I know how to package what is important in it. And yeah, to wrap it up in this way, I think transdisciplinary projects work if we remember and incorporate the humanity. They don't work if we just focus on the task at hand and thank you very much and get the stuff done.
Thank you so much for that, Prof. Again, I really appreciate that humanity came into this discussion. I guess like an initial follow-up from this would be, well, in general, again, coming back to the abstract questions of where do we draw the line? I see somebody mentioned general artificial intelligence in the chat. It's like, if we want to create general artificial intelligence, right? I feel like if we don't somehow incorporate this complexity of human beings, the emotional side of our lives, will never really be there, right? Simply dry mathematics doesn't quite cut it. At least it doesn't for us. And surely there must then be some meaning to this interpersonal connection. But again, I don't really want to drive this too much, I guess, of the topic. So perhaps if I look at the questions and answers posted here. Oh yes, Bernard, please, you wanted to say something.
I'll be very brief to not extend that, but to say that you talk about office politics and competition. And when I read about artificial intelligence, one of the things that is very widely discussed or commonly discussed there is the ethics of it, the quality of it, and so forth. And I think we need to focus on this issue, because if we cannot do collaboration and office politics, if we cannot solve that, I think our chances of doing ethical artificial intelligence is lower. So I think it actually is a really important issue to focus on for the future of artificial intelligence. Start at home, start with myself.
Yeah, if you're not a good human being, how can you make a good model? It's a very, very interesting take. Anybody else? I see Nico wants to, please.
I'll just quickly add to that. I think one of the big issues that I've experienced in terms of where things go wrong sometimes with collaborative research is that everybody has got a bias, and especially if those biases are kept implicit. And then as the project unfolds, those biases become more and more explicit, and then you realize, but what I thought this person's what's meaningful for that person is not what's meaningful for that person. And I think a big thing to do in the beginning of a project is to really understand what is the meaning for each person and makes things explicit, so that at least we're aware of our biases, and that's not going to change, and that's going to evolve towards a more common bias as we follow a more iterative approach and go on with the project. But it's just trying to be transparent and to try and be explicit as far as possible. And that's a very easy way then to try and at least get rid of most of the office politics. And also in that kind of context, not everybody's lifespan is the same in a project. So somebody's lifespan is maybe 10 years in that project. Somebody else, like I'm typically a methods researcher. So I come in, help to solve with a method, and then I'm out, I'm doing something else again. So my lifespans are typically short in a project. And so also to just appreciate that upfront, to say there are different lifespans for different people in the same project. And then just to make sure everything is a bit more explicit in the beginning. That helps to at least get the dialogue going, I think. Sure.
Thanks, Prof. I do see that we have questions in the question box, and I'm really enjoying this conversation, but I guess let us try to at least answer some of the questions that the audience has. I see the very first one is actually very applied. So I'm going to click the start answering button and see what it does. I'll read the question. On the AI application to engineering, what are the most used models in predictive maintenance? And how useful are they, provided uncertainty quantification can be a bit of a challenge in ML, whilst an essential to engineers, for example, automotive design, etc. All right, so I feel like this question is addressed to the engineers. Would any of the engineers like to take it?
I think Nico is better
I'll try to give it a go.
Experienced to do that.
So in terms of what are the most used models, I think the reality is when it comes to condition-based modeling and engineering, the most used models are really signal processing kind of approaches, where it's still the engineer that's in the loop to a large extent in terms of solving those problems, the classical kind of approaches. Then there are essentially a lot of classification, unfortunately. So classification is a big thing in sort of condition-based monitoring. So to say it's healthy, it's unhealthy. I'm not a big fan of that. So I'm a big advocate, and I'm trying to drive this argument that we should embrace latent variable models a lot more in condition-based monitoring. And the reason for that is it's not about whether you're healthy or unhealthy. It is in essence how much unhealthy are you? 10%, 20%, and why? And latent variable models are really an approach to solve both those problems. But that's only solvable if you have a latent space that is really untangled and interpretable. Unfortunately, that's a difficult problem. The one thing I do want to mention is we don't nearly, in engineering specifically, we don't need such crazy models as what you need typically when you work with website data or human data. And the reason for that is very simple. We're living in a very much in a physical world with lots and lots of constraints. And so in essence, although the problem that I'm living with is a very high dimensional problem, but the physics adds so many constraints that I end up with such a small and simple latent space, or let's call it a manifold in the end. Because every time I impose physics to possibilities, if I can put it like that, I get something that is more and more, a little bit more simplified, So every time we add in constraints into our world, we essentially end up with something that's a lot smaller. So it's a smaller dimensional problem embedded in a much higher dimensional problem. And so we have the benefit of linearization there. So typically linear models perform quite well. And when I do research, I always force my students to start off with a linear model. If you want to do a VAE, you start first with PCA. If you want to do something like beta VAE, or you start with ICA or something like that, start with a linear model. And the students struggle to beat the performance of those linear models, especially for engineering data. And there's a good reason for that, and that is our models are not so crazy, fortunately. So that's why I also like to do machine learning and AI as an engineer. So, just in short.
Yeah, it's like with the meta heuristics. If you cannot beat the random search, you are obviously wasting your time. So same, if you cannot beat the PCA. Unpopular opinion, deep learning is not all you need. Thank you so much for that. All right, any more comments on that? Otherwise, let's go to the next one. Let's say we are done answering that. Next question. I see this one got 2 upvotes, and this one is, I think, about ethics. So recently there has been a demand that we need to explicitly mention the downside of research, like explaining that facial recognition is good for fast payment, blah, 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 but it can be used by other nations, like being deployed against the minority. And yes, there have actually been some cases where obviously AI was clearly used for an evil purpose. Okay, and then the question is, how do I put this in my paper or patents without scaring my private funder with lots of money? I'm not exactly sure how money factors into this, but yes, I guess as far as I understand this question, if I know that my technique potentially can be used in a very sort of bad way, do I not publish it? Or, do I keep it in my desk, or do I actually, how do I guess, make safe AI? Who would like to comment on that?
I can go quickly.
Yes.
Yeah, this touches especially on the other side of governance. So this is not simply a thing for the scientist, right? So I'm currently finishing a paper that was due 2 days ago, but I'm going to submit on Monday. That has to do with this. Typically, when people think about data and governance, right now in South Africa, people think about POPIA, right? Oh, there's this thing that's supposed to protect my private information, but data governance is more than that. It touches into now the uses of that data in terms of the models that get built. So that's why at the beginning I talked about that we need to have people have a common understanding, because then it brings up this question of what do I allow? So let's think about this in a very simple manner. If you took data from 50 years ago about credit scoring in South Africa, so who gets credit and not? So the simple way to build a credit model in South Africa would be you take all the data of all the people who applied for a loan, and then you check who has given a loan and not. In South Africa, you would have 2 skews immediately, race and gender, right? That there were people who were just rejected because of that. Even though, let's say that is not even collected, but it's in there. So it is not simply, I took the model, I built it, and it works, because in my data, it gives me a nice accuracy of 90-something%. We've come to that agreement, and that area is very regulated, because we know that there's biases within the system. And as such, if you're in finance and you come up with a new credit model, it is checked a lot, right? And you need to, there's regulators that check for that. And now, how do we now get into AI having the same type of things where you have guards, whether it's a regulatory authority or it's the government, who says,
hey, you are about to deploy a facial recognition system, it needs to, at minimum, meet these kind of requirements as per how society has agreed, right? Because that we know is going to be fluid on the way. At the moment, a lot of these technologies, especially what's happened with the AI, they've come into our society without us ever having a conversation about the downsides. So the big push in the space, which is different maybe to some other fields in the past, has been that we've had a rise of people studying the ethical implications because we know that regulation is going to take longer to catch up. So there's now, even within, if you think about ACM, IEEE, there's whole sections of those professional bodies that are now looking at the ethics. It is not for nothing. It is important to have it because we know we need to come up with these regulations. So you then can look at the EU. They've got now AI regulations that have been tabled. Now we have to ask ourselves, like, whether in South Africa we're going to have follow-ups to POPIA that look at models and making sure people understand. Because some of the reasons you highlight the negative things is that it's actually the ethical thing to do at the moment until regulation catches up. Right, to say that here's where my data comes from, here's what my data can't see, right? We work in language, and one of the things that we are doing right now, every time we build new embeddings or language models, we actually spend a lot of time understanding the data that we put inside for whatever South African language, because we know it basically has gaps in it. We can't assume that it's going to cover every topic out there on that part, and we try to describe that as part of building the language model, so that people know that this language model definitely won't, like, it will really be bad at anything that has to do with this concept that is just not actually included in the data at all, and on that part. And that's the correct thing to do, because then somebody, if you didn't write that in your model card or in your data statement sheet, like, you know, and this is obviously referring to Timnit and Margaret Mitchell's work, that of putting up data sheets and model cards for your models, is so that people can easily understand what your model can be used for and then what its limitations are, which is, I come from an engineering background, I'm an electrical engineer. That's the thing I do every time I get a new chip or something like that. I open up the sheet to figure out what it can and can't be used for. On this part, and we're asking that, and it's going to become, maybe right now it might just be that the regulators are not asking for it, but it is coming. It is something that is coming, and it's something that has to be done so that people don't end up, inadvertently abusing a model, right? Using it for something that it really can't be used for.
Thank you so much for Cosi. Yeah. Definitely is something we can't just, you know, assume to do itself. It's like, it just has to be a part of the equation, especially if you do in fact work, you know, if you're not just solving a completely abstract problem, as long as, you know, any humans are actually in the loop immediately. This is something that you have to be aware of. All right, thank you. Anybody else would like to comment on this, or shall we go to the next question? Let's see what else we can answer. I think this question is quite relevant. So the question is from a student in Ethiopia about how can the students potentially, you know, do a PhD in data science. But I think I'd like to expand this question. In general, I wanted to ask each of you about this. I think in our audience right now, there are quite a number of students who are either already doing postgraduate research or perhaps, you know, considering doing postgraduate research. And I think we as scientists actually do need the students, you know, to help us. Let's be honest, students do a lot of, you know, dirty work and like first prototypes and whatnot. I think there is this extremely strong sort of, I'm not exactly sure how to phrase it best, but, you know, we depend on each other. Scientists depend on students depend on good supervisors. So are you open to take more students? If a student wanted to actually work with you, how can they approach you? Should they come with their own proposal? Do you have topics available? Do you have funding available? You know, how hard or easy is it actually for a student, UP or external student, perhaps student from another country, on the continent, anywhere else in the world? how do these students actually approach you? Maybe somebody gets inspired after this webinar and, they really, feel like civil engineering or astronomy is what they really want to do, or, plant diseases. So what's your advice to students? How do students get their foot in the door? Who would like to comment on that?
I can.
Please, Nico. And then we have Kshitish.
Okay.
So let's Nico and then Kshitish, and then we'll see, maybe we'll have more volunteers.
I think there's a couple of approaches. The one is you can do a bit of research on the supervisors that you would like to potentially work with, and just get an idea of what are the things that they typically value. Because what enhances the chances for a supervisor to take on a student is when the alignment is well. So it's almost like when you have two vectors and the dot product is they pretty much parallel and aligned with each other, then there's a good chance that the supervisor will just say, I would love to grab you as part of the group and let's do some research. When those vectors are orthogonal, it's a bit more tricky. So in essence, it's matching really what you want to do and what your vision is for your own career with that of the supervisor, and try to find that supervisor that is the most aligned with what you want to do. And also then there's the human element, and that is just start the conversation with the supervisor or with the potential person, and then see how it goes. It's not every conversation you start will end up possibly in that the person will say, yes, let's go for it. But at least you're getting to know that person, and rather find out whether that's a compatible relationship before you get into signing a contract and now let's roll and let's get the research done. Because in the end, it is a human interaction. So you want to find somebody that you can walk a journey with, somebody that will take your interest at heart as well and will want to walk your journey as well, not just their own journey. But in the end, funding is definitely helps if you are willing to try avenues of funding. And your supervisor most probably, or somebody that's interested in having you as a student, will help you to explore those funding channels. But in essence, that's definitely something that you would have to most probably be proactive with if you really want to enhance your chances of getting a supervisor. Sometimes you're lucky and the supervisor says, I just got an NRF grant, I've got 10 million waiting, I don't know what to do with it. But that's very seldom. And so that's in essence. So proactivity, I think, is the most important thing. And the next thing is really just be a motivated student, because I will take 10 average students that are motivated before I take one genius student that's unmotivated. So it's not about intelligence, or it's about your motivation and your willingness to want to learn and want to grow. Because in the end, I think everybody on this panel has one goal at heart when you take on a student, and that is you want to see the growth of your student to be a maximum. That's the first goal. All the other things are sort of secondary and tertiary in my view, because that human capital development is really the primary thing. That's also the thing that really adds value to the country in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Kshitish?
Hi. A bit of a background, I think, is necessary to what I'm going to say. Right now, from a perspective of radio astronomy in South Africa, we are really doing great. Meerkat, which has been now released a couple of years ago, is one of the best instruments in the whole world, and South Africa is also going to be part of the upcoming square kilometer array. So, but along with this, the government is really trying to make sure that there is participation from South Africans in this. What is this going to be? And essentially a paradigm change in how we look at the universe. And it's not just a wish, but there is a concerted effort by making funding available for students who want to work in astronomy in general and radio astronomy in particular. So, and as I said, as a result of these new telescopes coming in, the data volumes which are available are just enormous. And where does AI come in? It comes in exactly there. So if you're interested in things like, the scope is so large that I would probably have to give a whole lecture on what you could do if you want to work in AI and astronomy intersection, but all the way from is my instrument working fine? Is it correlated with any variables like wind, sunlight, etc.? All the way to, are there new unforeseen sources, galaxies being seen in the data which scientists have completely missed, or there is a lot of multivariate data And can you find something which no human has the capacity to find, but the AI techniques do? To another spectrum, in the sense that can we construct something which will elevate the compute-intensive processes which are required in the analysis of this data? So there are all sorts of fields where you could join in the research and the adventure, let me say. The way to do that is to look at things like NRF advertisements for both PhD and MSc positions, which are fully funded, and in particular at the UP website also, where there are advertisements from time to time about such positions. So if you're at UP, please, of course, feel free to talk directly to me, and I would really love to see what you're interested in. But I just wanted to say that this is perhaps the perfect time to join this particular field in South Africa, and I urge you to make the best of the opportunity.
Thank you so much. So far I'm definitely hearing that the student needs to do some research before they just like, oh, astronomy sounds cool, I want to do astronomy. Like, if you are invested, if you want to do postgraduate research, obviously you need to show the supervisor that you do in fact have some emotional investment, real interest, real passion for it. And also, in my experience, if a student does something just because everybody else is doing it, he's not very likely to succeed. It's important to, again, it has to be personally your topic that you as a human being are interested and passionate about. Thank you for that, Kshitij. Perhaps Bernard, please.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I mean, when you come across students who, they're passionate about this field, it's very tempting to find ways of working with them. And especially if they have, so that's the other thing I want to highlight there, is if they've been proactive in some ways. And I remember sitting with a student recently, and she had done some online courses, free online courses, in a particular field, which was outside her formal training. I mean, the demonstration of genuine interest and proactivity, she's now a PhD student in the program, is very, very attractive.
Thank you. Cosi and Venat, would you like to give any advice to potential postgrads?
I think from my side, I totally agree with this whole thing about I need a student with an interest and a passion, and then one can work with them. And I would even say, if I don't have money and I've got a student with an interest and a passion, I will find money with pleasure, because then you can see that there's a relationship possible, there's an outcome possible. And getting back to what I said earlier, I'm happy to invest in this, whether it's funding or equipment or time, because you can see you can take the science further and you can do the human development part of that. And I think that's for me the most important. I don't think any of us want a student that arrives because they want a master's or a PhD, and it's sort of, well, tell me what I can do. If I need to tell you what you can do on a postgraduate level, I often told my students, and I generalize with this, your parents support your initial studies. You support your further studies. And what I'm trying to say with that is, yes, your basic training and stuff, that's something that you may not necessarily always understand. If you do a first degree in engineering or BSc or so on, you may sort of have an idea of, okay, I want to do this. But if you are going further than that and you don't have real passion, real interest, you are going to waste a lot of money, time, everything, and you are most probably going to be disappointed.
Thank you. Cosi?
Thanks for this. I think just to, in this one, it will be slightly different to the rest of the thing, not just
headed towards what to do to work with myself. I think I shared earlier a link for people who might be interested, like prospective. We have a guide on our group website. But in general, in these spaces, it's really to understand an area that you want to go towards. Do your research again on people out there, identify potential supervisors and interview them as well, right? It's people sometimes think it's about, oh, we're talking to you to interview you and figure out, but then you also should figure out how you work and what kind of supervision you want. Right, and on that part, there's sometimes we identified that you might want to get a superstar supervisor who typically only is available to any of their lab members like 1 week a year. And if that's okay with you, there are people who are like, there's like, no, that's fine. That's all right. But if you then want somebody who you can sit out, like, down with at the end of a day and then talk about some philosophical things in your area of work, then that's the thing that you want. And you have to be careful kind of that. It's something that is more the human thing than about the kind of, the science on that part. And there's more and more opportunities now. In the chat, I put a link to the MLDS AI Africa mailing list, and that's now grown to over 2,000 people. And you see opportunities when people advertise them. You can also share things through that as well. And that's something that's come along that we didn't have before. And that allows for like, to interact. Also, and now we have social media and different ways that people share their work. And through that, you can then interact and then start to identify spaces and even ask for recommendations. I have some students ask and say, oh, I'm interested in working in this space. Who do you recommend? And I can put my list and say, here's a person at VETS, here's a person at, like, at Nelson Mandela University who works in this space, and you might want to talk to them on this part. We are a small country. We do not have any departments that have 200 PhD students in AI. But what we can do is work across the different institutions and make sure that we have a thriving environment that allows them for great high quality work to be going on all over the place. So it is for me very important in that part of saying, don't think that if you reach out to me, I'll only say, oh, there's only Nico on that part. But we know that there's different things that are going on also in our lives. There might be the peak of a project that's going on in a grant, and at that time you can't take any more students. But there might be somebody else who's just starting off on something, as Nico said, and they need more students quickly on that part. The point is to then get in touch, and then it's a relationship you're going to have to, it's a long period of time when you're working on either your MSCs or PhDs on that part. So it's not just I applied and then that's kind of the thing.
I see there is a question in the chat box from Prof. Ilov. Do you mean interest and passion on top of complying to the normal admission criteria, or do you think that the normal admission criteria should actually be more flexible? Should we give somebody a shot who maybe doesn't exactly comply, but they have so much passion, it's just overflowing, and do you think we should be more flexible in that respect? Or should we stick to our guns and be like, if your mathematics is not exactly on 75%, sorry.
Yeah. I think one must be slightly open-minded, if I can say it like that. And I mean, there is a minimum requirement. They sort of, listen, if you are working in a field and mathematics is important, if you don't understand the mathematics, sorry, it's just not going to work. But I do think in a field like this, which is more transdisciplinary, more touching various things, one must sometimes be a bit more open-minded about exactly whom do we accept into the program. What is important still, and it's something that Bernard mentioned earlier with the transdisciplinary type of projects, it does not mean that we should not be specialists in what we are doing because we are working transdisciplinary. And I think that's a part to just be careful about in your postgraduate studies. If you are still building up these foundations to base your knowledge and experience and stuff on, you cannot totally neglect it. It's not what I'm saying. But I do think you may get somebody with a real good insight into part of the expected expertise, and they may lack a bit on the other side. And I think one needs to, with an open mind, then say, listen, is there a way to pick up on this side? Because we really have got something strong over here. But open-minded.
And I almost, yes, please, Nico.
Honestly, I just want to add to that. I think I completely agree that I think the reason is if somebody does not make the minimum admission criteria, the question is why. Is it because it's a fundamental issue that somebody has tried many times and failed? It's more like it's not aligned with their skill set, or is it just the lack of exposure? Because then one can actually say that let's rather take an example. For instance, in our program we have what's called MSA 732. It's an independent study. You can, instead of before engaging in a full-on master's, say let's just do a small version of a master's and see to what extent you cope with that. And if that is a successful delivery of that, then boom, you've aligned yourself to actually enter into the master's. So there's ways then to craft sort of, let's call it gateways into the program for people that are maybe not at that stage complying to the minimum requirements, but really are bubbling over in terms of passion and interest. Because, and I think in the end, that will go a lot further in the long-term career than just the innate sort of abilities that you have. Because we all were born not knowing maths, couldn't count, couldn't do a lot of things, yeah, and we all learned that over time. And the question is just to what extent we've had opportunity and we've had good guidance and good mentors, and how much of that we happen, how much we engage in reflection, self-reflection on those kind of topics. Thank you.
Yeah, very true. I see all panelists would like to speak up. Please, I think Bernard raised his hand first, then let's do Bernard and then Kshitish.
Yeah, I want to just agree with that, and it's in some ways a bit theoretical because these things take a long time, but I think universities do need to rethink admission models. And of course, you used the example earlier of producing a paper that's somewhere between law and machine learning. You can't publish it anywhere. And I think we sit with the same problem in terms of degrees that we offer, admission requirements and so forth, that they're often built on on data that is no longer relevant or no longer focused on the future. I have a colleague who was passionate about the future of engineering training, and the engineers on here will kill me. So let me take that example to biology. Let's talk about, if we think about the rate of development that we would like to see in Africa, on the African continent, if we look at old traditional models of training biologists, let me not say engineers, they can speak for themselves, but if we take only those old models, then the rate of development is not sufficient to bring us to the point where we want to be in 2015. It's a simple calculation that you can make. And he would cite, in his case now, engineering models in Canada, where they have explored different ways of training engineers that is not necessarily an engineer in a traditional sense, but are doing some elements of that in a very efficient way. And I think there's a great need for that in our African higher education institutions, looking at alternative models.
Thank you. Kshitish, I think you also wanted to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in again, and I agree with what most people have said. The so-called normal admission criteria should be flexible, and interest and passion are really at the top, and they are what matters. If the prospective candidate does not have the so-called full requirements, then it's a question just of time, because that is what has been missing in the equation. How much time someone has had to devote to learning a particular topic, and then that's all that is needed. So then it's a question of how much can you go around that for your particular project. Can you modify that so that the candidate who is really interested can be admitted, or can you spend a little more of effort in actually training them for that particular task? Again, unfortunately, there are constraints on all of us, mostly those of time, and we need to work around those boundaries. But yeah, I would say that we need to be very flexible in such cases.
Yes, another comment, I think, from Prof. Slippers.
Well, a very brief comment. Institutions take a long time to change. And I think as an interim step, bridging models is important. So, as academic institutions, that we have bridging programs where students who might not traditionally qualify can come in, we can assess abilities and maybe take them into a more formal training program.
Thank you, everybody, for the comments. It was quite insightful. We only have 5 minutes left until the official closure of this event, but perhaps we can quickly throw in one last discussion topic, just because there is a lot to talk about. And I guess I would like to apologize to all the attendees who have submitted questions and we did not get to them. You are actually welcome to get in touch with us. You can find our emails on the UP website. Just Google our names and you'll probably find our emails. So you're welcome to email us directly. But I think the last thing that I would like to raise, just to sort of end the discussion on a high note, is I see one of the questions here is, can we use AI to solve societal problems like potholes, quality of newly built roads, etc.? And on top of that, quite a few questions that I got via the Google form were similar. One question was, can AI be used to solve global warming? Can AI be used to address the global sustainable development goals and whatnot? So clearly that is something that concerns many of the people in the audience. So I'm certain that everybody on the panel will have at least a short comment on that point. To what extent, essentially, can we use AI to just go ahead and save the world? Yes, Nicholas.
Quick one, don't do it.
Cosi, please.
Like a quick one is don't do it in that way. We are very tech optimistic in our spaces. Everybody who works on a technical area is always going to be very optimistic about their way. Find out and take time about a problem. There's no free lunch. And then from there, build on. And then it really, through interacting with others, I think you then come up to the opportunities where you can bring different pieces together at the right time. And then boom, you resolve that, that problem very well. AI is just one tool. It is not the tool. And we should always be wary of that. Unfortunately, buzzwords sell, and then you get lots of money for buzzwords.
Thank you. I think, Nico, you also had a comment.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I'll be a little bit controversial here, maybe, but I think for me the two biggest issues with that we have on the planet is that we tend to forget as over generations we lack the ability to really feel and understand what people went through in the past. That's one aspect. And the other thing is that we sense only locally. We don't sense globally over the planet. And it really depends on to what extent we direct AI towards interacting a global nervous system with our local nervous systems and a global memory, but not just a memory of watching a video of the Second World War, for instance, but to really understand the pain and experience the pain, to really have a nervous system integration. I think there's a chance then that as a planet and as a society, we would act very differently if we were born with the past hurts and the past pains, and we actually don't forget those lessons. And also we'll act differently when we throw a wrapper here in South Africa and it hurts somebody in, let's say, in Europe somewhere, or somebody, that kind of stuff. So I think once we have that integrated nervous system, and AI potentially has the potential to do that, maybe in the long run, in the future, but the question is to what extent do we direct it to that? I think that's sort of would be a key part for AI to really service a sort of a global role, in my view.
Thank you for that. Any other comments from the panel on saving the world with AI? Please, Prof. Steyn.
If I can sort of get back to something I said in the beginning, I think AI can for sure give us a lot of the intelligence to solve problems, seeing much bigger trends, much bigger stuff that you don't have the ability as one person to be able to see. But I think if we really want to solve the world's problems, save the world and everything, we need the wisdom, humanity part to that. Because AI can tell us you should not use coal for energy today. But then you start to ask the question, okay, that's fine. So what do we use today? And I think, again, the real plea that let's use all the tools, as because he has also said, we've got beautiful tools, we've got them, it's there. But then we need to say, okay, the tool told us I spoke to somebody this morning and I said the tool may tell us 1 + 1 = 2. And that's a correct answer. But in my culture, 2 may be an unlucky number. So in my wisdom, I say 1 + 1 is 1.99 or 2.01 because of my humanity. And I think that's when we will really solve the problems, if we remember we are humans on Earth. We are not just computers.
So we messed up this planet as humans and we have to solve it as humans. We cannot basically delegate this responsibility onto AI. Any final remarks, Kshitish, Bernard, on the saving the world stance?
Yeah, I would just maybe add then something that I said earlier. Let's start at home, so that question of competition, amongst each other. If we want to solve big problems out there, let's start with the small ones around us and in our personal relations. And in particular, in this case, how we're building collaborative teams to bring AI to the many fields where it can have impact.
Kshitish?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I agree. There are no magic solutions. As for climate change, we do know what needs to be done in broad brushstrokes. If AI provides the tool to help along with that, yes, it's great, and we should all aim towards that. But again, it's not going to provide a solution by itself. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. So I guess the conclusion is it's our humanity that can save the world, not fancy deep learning models. And I think we can all agree on that. On that note, I would like to close the panel. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. I know we had UP students and academics. We had people from all around the country and hopefully the continent as well. Thank you, everybody, for making time. Thank you for all the panelists. And yes, to all the attendees, please feel free to reach out to us, and all the best with your endeavors to save the world and find your place in it. Hopefully that does include some collaborative AI research. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day further.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Great discussion. Thanks, Anna.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Anna. Well done.